The morning sun cast long shadows across the military airbase as Captain Sarah Martinez walked toward her H-64 Apache helicopter. The crisp desert air filled her lungs as she completed her pre-flight checklist with practiced precision. At 28, she had already established herself as one of the most skilled pilots in her squadron, but today felt different. There was an electricity in the air that she couldn't quite explain. Her co-pilot, Lieutenant James Walker, was already securing his equipment in the cockpit. They had flown together for 8 months, developing the kind of trust that only comes from shared danger and countless hours in the air. Walker was known for his quick thinking and steady nerves, qualities that had saved their lives more than once during their deployment in Afghanistan. The mission briefing had been straightforward. Intelligence reports indicated enemy movement in a valley approximately 60 kilometers northeast of their base. Their job was to conduct reconnaissance and provide support for ground troops who would be moving through the area later that day. It was the kind of routine patrol they had performed dozens of times before, yet Sarah found herself checking and rechecking her equipment with unusual thoroughness. As they lifted off, the familiar vibration of the Apache's twin engines settled into Sarah's bones. The helicopter responded to her touch like a living thing, rising smoothly into the cloudless sky. Below them, the landscape stretched out in endless shades of brown and gold, broken only by the occasional cluster of buildings or the thin line of a road cutting through the desert. 20 minutes into their flight, Walker spotted movement through his targeting system. A convoy of 3 vehicles was moving rapidly along a dirt road that wasn't supposed to have any traffic according to their intelligence briefing. Sarah banked the Apache to get a better view, her eyes scanning the terrain for any signs of additional threats. The vehicles appeared to be civilian trucks, but their behavior was suspicious. They were traveling at high speed and taking an indirect route that suggested they were trying to avoid detection. Sarah radioed their position back to base while keeping the convoy in sight. The response came quickly. Ground forces were too far away to intercept, and satellite imagery wasn't available for the area. As they continued to observe, Sarah noticed something that made her blood run cold. One of the trucks had stopped, and several figures had emerged carrying what looked like rocket-propelled grenade launchers. The convoy wasn't just suspicious, it was actively hostile. Walker immediately began targeting procedures, while Sarah maneuvered the Apache into an attack position. Years of training kicked in as they worked together with mechanical precision. The Apache's cannon systems came online, and Sarah felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. Every decision from this moment forward could mean the difference between completing their mission and never returning home. The first truck began moving again, but now Sarah could see armed figures in the back. They had stumbled onto what appeared to be a weapons shipment or a mobile attack unit preparing to strike at coalition forces. Her radio crackled with static as she attempted to contact base for updated orders, but the signal was weak and intermittent. Walker's voice cut through her concentration. "We've got company," he said, his tone calm, but urgent. Sarah's eyes immediately went to her instruments, then to the horizon. 3 small aircraft were approaching from the east, flying low and fast. They weren't showing any identification signals, and they were definitely not coalition aircraft. The situation had just become significantly more complicated. Sarah's mind raced through their options while her hands remained steady on the controls. The enemy aircraft were still several kilometers away, but they were closing distance rapidly. The convoy below had also spotted the incoming aircraft and was now moving with even greater urgency toward what appeared to be a prepared defensive position. Sarah made a split-second decision that would define everything that followed. Instead of engaging the convoy immediately, she decided to gain altitude and try to determine the intentions of the approaching aircraft. It was a calculated risk. They would lose their tactical advantage over the ground targets, but they would be in a better position to defend themselves against aerial threats. As the Apache climbed, Walker maintained his surveillance of both the convoy and the approaching aircraft. His targeting computer was working overtime, calculating distances, speeds, and threat assessments. The data was clear. They were outnumbered and potentially outgunned. The smart tactical decision would be to withdraw and call for backup. But Sarah knew that ground forces were scheduled to move through this area in less than 2 hours. If the convoy reached its destination and established a defensive position, coalition troops would walk into a carefully prepared ambush. The weight of that knowledge made withdrawal impossible, regardless of the personal risk. The radio crackled to life with a clear signal for the first time in 20 minutes. Base Command was ordering them to withdraw immediately and wait for reinforcements. Intelligence had identified the approaching aircraft as part of a larger enemy operation, and additional hostile forces were believed to be in the area. Sarah acknowledged the order, but her eyes remained fixed on the convoy below. The trucks had reached what appeared to be a prepared position, a cluster of buildings and defensive structures that would provide excellent cover for an ambush. If they withdrew now, those weapons and personnel would disappear into the complex terrain, only to emerge later when coalition forces were most vulnerable. Walker sensed her hesitation. "Sarah, we need to go," he said quietly. "Those aircraft will be in weapons range in less than 3 minutes." She knew he was right. Every aspect of their training emphasized the importance of following orders and avoiding unnecessary risks. But sometimes training had to yield to judgment, and sometimes judgment required accepting risks that others might consider unreasonable. "I'm taking us down," Sarah announced, pushing the Apache into a steep descent that would bring them back into attack range of the convoy. Walker didn't argue. He simply began reacquiring targets and preparing weapons systems. Trust was the foundation of their partnership, and if Sarah believed this was necessary, he would support her decision completely. The enemy aircraft were now visible without magnification, and Sarah could see that they were armed with air-to-air missiles. The Apache was formidable against ground targets, but it wasn't designed for aerial combat against dedicated fighter aircraft. They would have to complete their attack on the convoy and escape before the enemy aircraft could bring their weapons to bear. As they descended, Sarah's radio erupted with urgent calls from Base Command. She could hear the strain in the controller's voice as he repeated orders to withdraw immediately. Intelligence updates were coming in real time, painting an increasingly dangerous picture of enemy capabilities in the area. But Sarah had committed to her course of action, and turning back now would accomplish nothing except ensuring that coalition ground forces faced an ambush in a few hours. The convoy had reached its destination and was rapidly unloading personnel and equipment. Sarah could see figures moving with military precision, establishing defensive positions, and setting up what appeared to be heavy weapons. This wasn't just a transport operation. It was the deployment of a significant military asset designed to inflict maximum casualties on coalition forces. Walker's targeting system locked onto the first truck just as the enemy aircraft entered weapons range. The next few seconds would determine whether their split-second decision had been brilliant tactical thinking or a fatal error in judgment. Sarah's finger moved to the weapon controls while her eyes tracked the approaching enemy aircraft. The desert landscape blurred past as the Apache dove toward its targets. Time seemed to slow as training, instinct, and determination combined into a single moment of absolute focus. Whatever happened next will be decided by skill, luck, and the thin margin between success and disaster that defined every combat mission. In the distance, the enemy aircraft began their own attack runs, and Sarah realized that she and Walker were about to fight for their lives against overwhelming odds. The question was no longer whether they could complete their mission. It was whether they would survive the next 5 minutes. The convoy below opened fire with small arms, filling the air around the Apache with tracer rounds. Sarah felt the helicopter shudder as bullets struck the armored cockpit, but the Apache was built to withstand significant damage. She lined up her first target, while Walker prepared to engage the approaching aircraft with their limited air-to-air capabilities. Everything they had trained for, everything they believed about duty and sacrifice, was about to be tested in the most unforgiving arena possible. The outcome would determine not just their own fate, but the safety of hundreds of coalition personnel who were depending on intelligence they didn't yet know they needed. The landscape below changed dramatically as Sarah followed the coordinates provided by the mysterious voice. Instead of the open desert they had been flying over, the terrain became increasingly mountainous, with deep valleys and narrow canyons. It was perfect country for hiding from aerial surveillance, but it also limited their escape options if the landing zone proved to be a trap. Walker was continuously monitoring their fuel situation while keeping watch for pursuing aircraft. The Apache's damaged fuel system was losing aviation fuel at an alarming rate, and their engine temperature gauges were climbing toward dangerous levels. They had perhaps 15 minutes of flight time remaining before they would be forced to land regardless of the tactical situation. The enemy aircraft had fallen back during their flight toward the mountains, which was either a good sign or a very bad one. Either they had given up the pursuit, or they knew something about the destination that made continued pursuit unnecessary. Sarah tried to push these thoughts from her mind and focus on the immediate challenge of keeping the damaged Apache airborne. As they approached the coordinates, Walker spotted something unexpected through his surveillance equipment. A small village nestled in a valley between two ridges showed signs of recent activity, but the people moving around below didn't appear to be armed. More importantly, there was a flat area near the village that would accommodate an emergency landing. The mysterious voice came through on their radio again, this time providing specific approach instructions and wind information for the landing zone. The detail and accuracy of the information suggested someone with significant military aviation knowledge, lending credibility to the claim that they were dealing with a covert operative. Sarah began her approach to the village landing zone, while Walker prepared for the possibility that they might need to defend themselves immediately after touchdown. The Apache's weapons systems were nearly depleted, but they still had enough ammunition for a brief firefight if necessary. The helicopter's armor plating had proven its worth during the aerial combat, but they couldn't count on it to protect them indefinitely. As they descended, both pilots could see villagers emerging from their homes to watch the approaching helicopter. Children pointed at the Apache while adults gathered in small groups, their body language suggesting curiosity rather than hostility. It was a scene that neither pilot had expected after the intensity of the combat they had just survived. The landing was rougher than normal due to the helicopter's damaged systems, but Sarah managed to set the Apache down without further injury to her aircraft or crew. The engines wound down with mechanical groans that suggested extensive damage to internal components. They had reached safety, but the helicopter would require major repairs before it could fly again. Walker immediately began shutdown procedures, while Sarah maintained vigilance through the cockpit windows. The villagers were approaching slowly, and she could see that several of them were carrying what appeared to be medical supplies. Someone had clearly prepared for their arrival, which supported the claim that they were expected. A figure emerged from one of the larger buildings and began walking directly toward the Apache. The person was wearing civilian clothes, but moved with the confident bearing of someone with military training. As the figure came closer, Sarah realized it was a woman, perhaps in her 30s, with the kind of weathered appearance that came from extended time in harsh environments. The woman approached to within speaking distance and called out in heavily accented English, "Captain Martinez, Lieutenant Walker, welcome to our village. I am Agent Hassan, Coalition Intelligence. You are safe here, but we need to move quickly. Enemy forces are tracking your position and will arrive within the hour." Walker looked at Sarah with raised eyebrows. Their names had not been transmitted during any of the radio communications, which meant that Agent Hassan had access to classified information about their mission and crew assignments. It was either legitimate intelligence coordination or an extremely sophisticated trap. Sarah made the decision to trust Agent Hassan, at least temporarily. The Apache was too damaged to continue flying, and they were too far from their base to reach safety on foot. If this was a trap, they had limited options for escape anyway. She began the process of securing the helicopter's weapons and sensitive equipment. Agent Hassan proved to be remarkably knowledgeable about Apache helicopter systems. She helped them complete the security procedures while explaining the tactical situation in the area. According to her briefing, the convoy they had attacked was part of a larger operation designed to establish a forward operating base for enemy forces. The intelligence operative had been monitoring enemy communications for several weeks and had identified the convoy as a high-value target. However, Coalition Command had not been informed about the covert operation due to security concerns about communication intercepts. Sarah and Walker had stumbled into an ongoing intelligence operation without anyone planning for their involvement. As they worked to secure the Apache, Agent Hassan explained that the village had been providing support for her intelligence-gathering mission. The villagers were not combatants, but they had been helping to monitor enemy movement in the region in exchange for medical supplies and other assistance. It was a delicate arrangement that could be jeopardized by the presence of coalition military personnel. The sound of approaching aircraft interrupted their conversation. Agent Hassan immediately began directing villagers toward prepared hiding places while Sarah and Walker gathered their personal equipment from the Apache. The pursuing enemy aircraft had apparently located their landing zone and were preparing to attack the village. Agent Hassan led them toward a cave system that had been prepared as a defensive position. The natural rock formations would provide excellent protection from aerial attack, but Sarah was concerned about the safety of the villagers who had helped them. She asked Agent Hassan about evacuation procedures for the civilian population. The intelligence operative's response revealed the complexity of the situation they had entered. The villagers could not be evacuated without compromising other ongoing operations in the region. They had to remain in place and hope that the enemy aircraft would not attack civilian targets. It was a calculated risk that highlighted the difficult choices involved in covert operations. From their position in the cave, Sarah and Walker could observe the enemy aircraft as they circled the village. The pilots were clearly trying to determine whether the Apache represented a continuing threat or if it was merely a damaged aircraft that had made an emergency landing. Their decision would determine the safety of everyone in the village. Walker had managed to establish limited radio contact with their base using portable equipment salvaged from the Apache. The conversation was difficult due to poor signal conditions, but he was able to transmit their coordinates and request extraction. However, the response from command was not encouraging. No rescue aircraft could reach their position until the aerial threats in the area had been neutralized. Agent Hassan revealed that she had been in radio contact with other intelligence assets in the region. A coalition special operations team was operating approximately 50 kilometers to the southeast, and they might be able to provide assistance if the tactical situation deteriorated further. However, requesting their help would compromise their own mission and potentially endanger other operations. The enemy aircraft began strafing runs against the landing zone, destroying the Apache with concentrated cannon fire. Sarah watched her helicopter disintegrate under the sustained attack, feeling a mixture of sadness and relief. The aircraft had served them well and had probably saved their lives multiple times, but its destruction meant that enemy forces couldn't capture any sensitive equipment or technology. As the attack continued, Agent Hassan received a radio transmission that changed the dynamics of their situation. Coalition intelligence had been monitoring enemy communications and had discovered that the attack on the village was part of a larger operation. Enemy ground forces were moving toward their position with the intention of capturing any surviving coalition personnel. The intelligence operative's demeanor became noticeably more serious as she explained their options. They could remain hidden in the cave system and hope that enemy forces would not conduct a thorough search of the area. Alternatively, they could attempt to evade on foot toward the Special Operations Team's position, but that would require crossing 50 kilometers of difficult terrain while being actively pursued. Sarah found herself making another tactical decision with incomplete information and significant risks regardless of the choice made. Stay hidden and depend on the villagers' ability to conceal their presence or attempt an escape that might lead pursuing forces away from the civilian population, but would expose them to capture or death in the open desert. Walker's input was characteristically practical. Their personal equipment included enough food and water for perhaps 2 days of travel, but they had no transportation and limited ammunition for their sidearms. An escape attempt would require them to travel light and fast, while enemy forces had vehicles and air support to assist their search efforts. Agent Hassan offered a third option that neither pilot had considered. Her intelligence network included assets who could provide transportation and guides for an escape attempt. However, using these resources would compromise intelligence operations that had taken months to establish and might endanger other coalition personnel operating in the region. The decision was complicated by the approaching sound of ground vehicles. Enemy forces had reached the village and were beginning a systematic search of the area. Agent Hassan estimated that they had perhaps 30 minutes before the cave system would be discovered and searched. Whatever decision they made would have to be implemented immediately. Sarah realized that their situation had evolved far beyond a simple combat mission gone wrong. They were now participants in a complex intelligence operation involving multiple assets and long-term strategic objectives. The decisions they made would affect not just their own survival, but the success or failure of operations they didn't fully understand. The sound of voices speaking in Arabic grew closer as enemy soldiers began searching the buildings near the cave entrance. Agent Hassan whispered final instructions about escape routes and rendezvous points while Sarah and Walker prepared their equipment for rapid movement. Within minutes, they would discover whether their trust in a mysterious intelligence operative had been justified or whether they had walked into an elaborate trap designed to capture coalition military personnel. The enemy soldiers were methodical in their search, moving from building to building with the precision of well-trained military personnel. Agent Hassan motioned for absolute silence as voices echoed through the cave system, indicating that the search had reached their immediate area. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat in the oppressive quiet as they waited to discover whether their hiding place would be detected. A beam of light swept across the cave entrance, pausing momentarily before moving on. Sarah held her breath as footsteps approached their position, then gradually faded as the searchers moved toward another section of the village. Agent Hassan waited several more minutes before indicating that it was safe to speak in whispers. The intelligence operative revealed that the cave system connected to a series of natural tunnels that emerged several hundred meters away from the village. The villagers had used these passages for generations to move livestock and supplies during harsh weather, but they could also serve as an escape route if the situation became desperate. Walker was monitoring enemy radio transmissions using equipment that Agent Hassan had provided. The conversations were in Arabic, which he didn't understand, but the tone and urgency of the communication suggested that the search was intensifying. More importantly, additional enemy units were reportedly en route to reinforce the search operation. Agent Hassan translated the intercepted communications, revealing that enemy forces had identified the Apache's destruction site and were searching for surviving crew members. They had also discovered evidence that the helicopter had been in contact with ground personnel, leading them to expand their search to include the village and surrounding area. The situation was further complicated by the revelation that enemy forces had captured several villagers during their initial sweep. Agent Hassan's expression became grim as she explained that interrogation of the prisoners would eventually reveal the existence of the cave system and the assistance that had been provided to coalition personnel. Sarah realized that their presence in the village had created exactly the kind of situation they had been trying to avoid. Innocent civilians were now in danger because of their emergency landing, and the longer they remained hidden, the greater the risk to the local population. She began to consider whether surrendering might be the best option to protect the villagers. Agent Hassan firmly rejected any suggestion of surrender, explaining that coalition personnel captured in this area were rarely treated according to international law. More importantly, their capture would compromise ongoing intelligence operations throughout the region and potentially cost the lives of other covert operatives. They had to escape, regardless of the risks involved. The intelligence operative outlined an escape plan that would utilize the tunnel system to reach a pickup point where transportation would be waiting. The journey would require approximately 6 hours of difficult travel through underground passages and across open terrain. They would have to move immediately to reach the rendezvous before enemy search operations made the area impassable. Walker expressed concern about leaving the village when civilians were being held prisoner by enemy forces. His suggestion that they attempt a rescue operation was quickly dismissed by Agent Hassan, who pointed out that they lacked the personnel and equipment necessary for such an undertaking. Any rescue attempt would likely result in additional casualties and the complete compromise of intelligence assets in the area. Sarah found herself torn between military obligations and humanitarian concerns. Their training emphasized the importance of protecting civilian populations, but their current situation offered no good options for ensuring the villagers' safety. Whatever decision she made would have consequences that extended far beyond their immediate survival. The sound of approaching vehicles interrupted their planning session. Agent Hassan immediately began gathering equipment while directing Sarah and Walker toward the entrance to the tunnel system. The escape route led through a narrow opening that required them to crawl single file through passages that had been carved by centuries of water erosion. The underground journey was claustrophobic and physically demanding. The tunnels were barely wide enough to accommodate their equipment, and several passages required them to squeeze through openings that seemed impossibly narrow. Agent Hassan navigated the route from memory, moving with confidence despite the complete darkness of their surroundings. After what felt like hours of crawling through the tunnel system, they emerged in a canyon approximately 2 kilometers from the village. The sudden exposure to daylight was almost blinding after their time underground, and Sarah had to blink rapidly to adjust her vision. Agent Hassan immediately began checking the area for signs of enemy activity while Walker monitored their radio communications. The intelligence operative revealed that their transportation would be provided by another asset in her network, but the rendezvous point was still several hours away on foot. They would have to cross open terrain during daylight hours, which significantly increased their risk of detection by enemy search aircraft that were reportedly operating in the area. As they began their overland journey, Agent Hassan provided more details about the intelligence operation they had inadvertently joined. Coalition forces had been monitoring enemy capabilities in the region for several months, gathering information about weapons shipments, personnel movements, and strategic objectives. The convoy that Sarah and Walker had attacked represented a significant intelligence breakthrough. The destroyed convoy had been carrying more than just weapons and ammunition. According to intercepted communications, it had also included technical personnel and equipment for establishing a sophisticated communication center that would have coordinated enemy operations across a much larger geographic area. Their successful attack had disrupted planning for multiple operations that could have threatened coalition forces. Walker was maintaining periodic radio contact with their base using burst transmissions that were difficult to intercept and track. The updates he received painted an increasingly complex picture of enemy activities in the region. Multiple coalition units were now involved in operations designed to exploit the intelligence gathered from the convoy attack. Agent Hassan explained that their escape was being coordinated with these larger operations to maximize the strategic benefit of their survival. Other coalition assets were creating diversions and false targets to draw enemy attention away from their route. Their successful extraction would allow them to provide detailed briefings about enemy capabilities and tactics that had been observed during the aerial engagement. The terrain they were crossing became increasingly difficult as they moved away from the village. Rocky outcroppings provided concealment from aerial observation, but they also slowed their progress and made navigation more challenging. Agent Hassan's knowledge of the area proved invaluable as she led them along routes that avoided known enemy observation posts. Several hours into their journey, they encountered their first significant obstacle. A road that they needed to cross was being patrolled by enemy vehicles at regular intervals. Agent Hassan estimated that they would have to wait for approximately 30 minutes between patrols to safely cross the open ground, but waiting would delay their arrival at the rendezvous point. Sarah made the decision to cross immediately rather than wait for the next patrol cycle. Her reasoning was based on the assumption that enemy forces would be intensifying their search efforts as time passed, making later movement even more dangerous. Agent Hassan agreed with the assessment and began preparing for a rapid crossing of the exposed area. The crossing went smoothly, but Walker spotted dust clouds on the horizon that suggested additional vehicle movements in their direction. Agent Hassan changed their route toward more mountainous terrain that would provide better concealment, but would also require more time to traverse. They were now in a race against time and pursuing forces. As they climbed toward higher ground, Agent Hassan received a radio transmission that provided both good news and additional complications. The special operations team she had mentioned earlier was moving toward their position and could provide military support if they encountered enemy forces. However, the team's involvement would definitely compromise their own mission and might endanger other intelligence assets. Sarah realized that every aspect of their situation involved difficult choices between competing priorities. Personal survival, mission success, civilian safety, and strategic objectives all demanded different courses of action. The complexity of modern military operations meant that simple tactical decisions could have far-reaching consequences that weren't immediately apparent. The rendezvous point was finally visible from their elevated position, but so were the dust clouds of pursuing vehicles. Enemy forces had apparently detected their escape route and were moving to intercept them before they could reach extraction. Agent Hassan estimated that they had perhaps 20 minutes before the first enemy units would arrive at their destination. Walker established final radio contact with the extraction team, while Sarah and Agent Hassan prepared defensive positions among the rocky terrain. The approaching confrontation would determine not just their personal survival, but the success or failure of intelligence operations that extended far beyond their individual mission. Everything they had experienced since the beginning of their patrol had led to this moment of decision where training, luck, and determination would combine to determine their fate. The sound of approaching helicopters came from two different directions simultaneously, creating confusion about which aircraft represented rescue and which represented additional threats. Agent Hassan immediately activated a handheld beacon that would identify their position to coalition forces while Sarah and Walker prepared to defend their location against ground assault. The first helicopter to appear was clearly hostile, approaching from the direction of the enemy vehicle columns with weapon systems visible on its external pylons. But before it could establish an attack position, a second aircraft emerged from a canyon to the south, moving rapidly toward an intercept course with obvious aggressive intent. Walker's radio crackled with transmissions in English as the coalition extraction team announced their arrival and began engaging the enemy helicopter. The aerial battle that followed was brief but intense, ending when the enemy aircraft crashed into a rocky hillside after taking direct hits from air-to-air missiles. The explosion sent debris raining down across the valley floor. Agent Hassan was already moving toward the extraction helicopter's landing zone while directing Sarah and Walker to gather their equipment quickly. The coalition aircraft was a modified Black Hawk with additional armor and electronic countermeasures, designed specifically for operations in contested airspace. Its crew was clearly experienced in combat extraction missions. As they boarded the helicopter, Sarah could see enemy ground vehicles reaching positions where they could engage the aircraft with heavy weapons. The Blackhawks pilots didn't wait for everyone to be fully secured before beginning their takeoff. Lifting away from the landing zone, just as rocket-propelled grenades began exploding in the area they had occupied seconds earlier. The flight back to coalition territory was tense, but uneventful. Agent Hassan spent most of the journey debriefing Sarah and Walker about their observations during the aerial engagement and the intelligence they had gathered about enemy capabilities. Every detail of their experience would contribute to operational planning for future missions in the region. Walker was finally able to establish clear communications with their original base, reporting their status and providing preliminary information about the events of the past several hours. The response from command indicated that their survival and successful extraction had strategic implications that extended far beyond their individual mission. As they approached friendly airspace, Agent Hassan revealed additional information about the intelligence operation they had unknowingly supported. The convoy they had attacked had been carrying personnel and equipment for a major enemy offensive that had been planned for the following week. Their successful interdiction had forced cancellation or postponement of operations that could have resulted in significant coalition casualties. Sarah learned that her decision to engage the convoy despite orders to withdraw had been validated by a subsequent intelligence analysis. The weapons and communication equipment they had destroyed would have enabled enemy forces to coordinate attacks across multiple sectors simultaneously. Her willingness to accept personal risk had prevented a much larger tactical disaster. The helicopter touched down at a forward operating base where intelligence personnel were waiting to begin detailed debriefings. Sarah and Walker would spend the next several hours providing information about enemy tactics, equipment, and personnel that had been observed during their engagement. Agent Hassan would continue to coordinate with her network of assets to exploit the intelligence breakthrough they had achieved. During the debriefing sessions, Sarah gradually understood the full scope of what they had accomplished. The aerial engagement had not just been a successful defense against enemy attack. It had been a critical intelligence gathering opportunity that provided insights into enemy capabilities and intentions that couldn't have been obtained through any other means. Walker's detailed observations of enemy aircraft performance and tactics would contribute to developing countermeasures for future encounters. His accurate reporting of weapons systems and pilot behavior patterns would help coalition forces prepare for similar engagements in other operational areas. Every detail of their experience had strategic value. Agent Hassan's role in their survival and extraction was revealed to be part of a much larger intelligence operation that had been developing for months. Her network of assets and contacts had provided the foundation for successful coalition operations throughout the region. The trust and cooperation she had demonstrated during their escape had saved not just their lives, but the integrity of ongoing intelligence collection efforts. The investigation into how enemy forces had detected their original mission revealed security vulnerabilities that needed to be addressed immediately. Enemy monitoring of coalition communications had been more sophisticated than previously understood, requiring changes to operational procedures and communication protocols. Sarah and Walker's experience had exposed weaknesses that could have compromised future missions. Several days later, Sarah and Walker learned that the villagers who had helped them had been successfully evacuated by Coalition Special Operations Forces. Agent Hassan's intelligence network had provided the information necessary to locate and rescue the civilians who had been captured during the search operation. No one had been seriously injured, and the villagers were relocated to safe areas where they could continue their lives without fear of retaliation. The Apache helicopter's destruction had been complete enough to prevent enemy forces from recovering any sensitive technology or classified equipment. Sarah felt a mixture of sadness and professional satisfaction when she saw the intelligence photographs of the wreckage. The aircraft had performed beyond expectations and had probably saved their lives multiple times during the engagement. Walker's recommendation for a commendation for Agent Hassan's actions was enthusiastically supported by Intelligence Command. Her quick thinking and extensive preparation had not only saved coalition personnel, but had also preserved critical intelligence assets that would continue to provide strategic value for months to come. Her dedication to mission success despite personal risk exemplified the best traditions of covert operations. The aerial tactics that Sarah had developed during the engagement became part of training curriculum for other Apache pilots operating in similar environments. Her innovative use of the helicopter's capabilities against aerial threats provided valuable lessons for aircrew who might face comparable situations. The tactical manual was updated to include procedures based on her experience. Agent Hassan eventually revealed that she had been monitoring their radio communications from the beginning of their patrol mission. Her intelligence network had detected enemy preparations for the convoy operation several days earlier, and she had been positioned to provide assistance if coalition aircraft encountered the threats she knew were present in the area. The mysterious voice that had initially guided them to safety had been part of an elaborate contingency plan designed to protect coalition aircrew who might be shot down or forced to land in the operational area. Agent Hassan's careful preparation and attention to detail had created multiple options for rescue and extraction that could be implemented rapidly when needed. Sarah learned that her decision to trust the unknown voice and follow the provided coordinates had been based on more information than she had realized at the time. The authentication codes and tactical knowledge demonstrated in the radio transmissions had been genuine, even though the source had been unknown. Sometimes survival required making decisions based on incomplete information and accepting calculated risks. The investigation into enemy capabilities revealed that coalition forces had seriously underestimated the sophistication of opposition forces in the region. The aerial engagement had provided the first clear evidence of advanced weapon systems and trained personnel that posed a significant threat to ongoing operations. Strategic planning was modified to account for these enhanced enemy capabilities. Walker's technical analysis of the enemy aircraft performance characteristics contributed to intelligence assessments that influenced procurement decisions for future coalition equipment. His detailed observations of weapons systems and flight capabilities provided data that couldn't have been obtained through any other means. Sometimes the most valuable intelligence came from unexpected encounters rather than planned collection operations. The broader strategic implications of their mission's success extended far beyond the immediate tactical situation. Enemy plans for offensive operations had been disrupted at a critical moment, forcing them to postpone or cancel activities that could have changed the balance of power in the region. One successful mission had contributed to strategic objectives that affected coalition operations throughout the theater. Agent Hassan's intelligence network continued to provide valuable information for months after their extraction, leading to additional successful operations against enemy forces. The relationships and trust that had been built during Sarah and Walker's escape became the foundation for ongoing cooperation between military and intelligence assets. Their experience demonstrated the importance of coordination between different types of operations. Years later, Sarah would reflect on the series of split-second decisions that had transformed a routine patrol mission into a strategic intelligence breakthrough. The willingness to accept risk, trust unknown allies, and adapt to changing circumstances had made the difference between mission failure and exceptional success. Sometimes the most important victories came from situations that initially appeared to be disasters. The final irony of their experience was revealed when Agent Hassan eventually disclosed that the attack on their patrol had been partially anticipated. Enemy forces had been monitoring coalition flight patterns and had prepared specifically for helicopter operations in the area. What had appeared to be a chance encounter had actually been a carefully planned trap, one that had ultimately backfired against its creators when Sarah's tactical decisions turned defense into attack. Walker often wondered what would have happened if they had followed standard operating procedures and withdrawn when ordered. The convoy would have completed its mission, the communication center would have been established, and coalition forces would have faced coordinated attacks for which they were completely unprepared. Sometimes disobeying orders was the most professional thing a soldier could do.